All right. Button pressing has commenced. Time, space has been bent. And here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome to anybody who's new here and all the rest of y'all. What's up? How are we doing? How are you holding up against the strain of it all? I shouldn't assume that it feels like a strain to you. Maybe it doesn't feel like a strain to you, but the weight of the world. What do I mean by that? Is that, do I really feel like the weight of the world is on my shoulders? No, but I feel the weight of what happens in the world. I guess that's just a very modern phenomena that we have any awareness about what's going on around the globe, that when I think about what's happening in the world, it's not just like my neighborhood, it's the whole world. I guess I try to stay aware about what's going on in our geopolitics, and it certainly seems to trickle down into even my local government's decisions and what happens on state levels and the national level here in my country. And I guess, for me, I just feel like there's so much obvious lying and misdirection on so many levels. It's just really overwhelming. And when you have children, I got a couple of children, it's hard to imagine what the world is going to be like for them as they get older and become their own adults in it. And that feels heavy. It feels very heavy on me, and the challenges of just meeting your needs. And I just imagine other people feel that strain too. It can't just be me. Now, there is a counterpose, fortunately. There's lots of things I can do where I don't feel myself overwhelmed by the weight of the world, but I feel myself filled with the joy of having an existence on this incredible time-space continuum that we inhabit. And really, yoga has been my vehicle my whole adult life. This show is an extension of that, where I am able to find sources of inspiration, things that make me feel inspired, that make me feel alive in a way that can feel almost impervious, or not almost, it can feel impervious to the colorings of external forces that I have no control over. That's the empowerment of a yoga practice, the inner inspiration. So, I hope that you all are finding your sources of inspiration, that your yoga practice is serving you in this regard. And speaking of sources of inspiration, I've always imagined that this show would be an oral history of sorts, and I've really worked to see if I could get people who are steeped in all the different traditions of yoga to come on and talk about those traditions, or to get different viewpoints from different students who've studied in different lineages. And I think in the past there are times where I was potentially framing the discussions in a way that was overemphasizing the distinctions rather than looking to find the commonalities and intersections. And I think nowadays I'm more interested in what brings us together more than what's going to separate us in practice. At the same time, there are clearly technical and philosophical differences between different approaches. And I've learned, I think, to be more open and let my viewpoint not be held in a dogmatic way. So in any case, I think I've done a pretty good job, but there's certainly some areas where I haven't been able to get people on from a particular tradition, even after trying. And I think I just have some blind spots of certain teachers who I just didn't necessarily know about. And today we're going to fill one of those gaps. My guest is Mike Masi. And Mike is the founder of a Facebook group called the Worldwide Krishnamacharya Yoga Community. And our mutual friend Leslie Kamanoff put us in touch. Shout out to you, Leslie. And Mike is a student of Ramaswami, who was a student of Krishnamacharya, alongside others like TKB Desikachar and A.G. Mohan and a few others whose names aren't right in front of me. And as much as Mike did not want to be the representative of the Ramaswamy teaching lineage, I think he was a wonderful introduction for many people. And for me, I think an accessible inroads, because as we'll discuss, and maybe I'll say something about on the other side, there's reasons why I think I've never really delved much into Ramaswamy's teachings or haven't had people on the show who study with him. And so I felt like Mike really helped me bridge a gap. And I think that's what he's looking to do with his Facebook group. He's a very sincere practitioner, as you will hear. And I learned a few things from him, and I think that you will too. So I'm very happy to have had a chance to speak with him, and I'm glad that I get to share it with you today. Real quick before we get to that, I want to say thank you to our podcast premium subscribers. Specifically today, I want to express my gratitude to Fran and Simon Goss. Cheers to you both, Fran. And what's up, Simon? Again, the folks who come around on this list of podcast premium mentions, who come around like more than once, I consider them real ones, as they say in certain circles, people who've really supported this show over time. And I'm so grateful to you. Thanks, Fran and Simon. And if you don't know what I'm talking about and you're new around here, the most recent 52 episodes of this show are always available on our public feed. We do also have a podcast premium subscription where you get access to the full archives and you become a supporter of the show. You sponsor the show. We used to do sponsors, and I read all these ads for jewelry and whatever else I was getting paid to read ads for, and now we don't do that. Now listeners are the sponsors of the show. It's how we keep it going. And if you enjoy what you hear on the show, you want to help keep it going, becoming a podcast premium subscriber is how you do it. It's choose your rate. You cancel at any time. If you don't have money and there's an old episode you want to listen to, all you have to do is email us. We definitely hook you up. But if you have even a little something, certainly makes a difference. We're grateful to everybody who's doing it. To learn more about becoming a podcast premium subscriber, along with all of the other things I offer, I've got ongoing weekly practice classes and discussions. If you want to engage with me in ways outside of just listening to this show, there are ways for you to do that. And you can find out about everything at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all. I think that's fine. I think we'll just get to it, and I will touch base with you on the other side. Let's go ahead and listen to this conversation that I had with Mike Masi. Hello?
Jay, how are you?
Hi, Mike. I'm good. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I have to say, whenever, I think you've listened to the show before, so I'm already recording, and I'd like to think of us having just begun, okay?
Sounds good.
And I was just about to say that I'm always looking to see if I can find a certain commonality with whoever's coming on the show, if there's something that I feel like might connect me to that person. And with you, I felt like we really do come from like a same tribe. And I sort of think of it as a small tribe, but I imagine it's kind of a big tribe of people. And to illustrate to you the characteristics of this tribe, I'm going to tell you an anecdote about my life, a short anecdote about my life.
Mm-hmm.
At a very pivotal moment, maybe one of the lowest, if not the lowest moments in my life, I had a very good friend who asked me if I could identify anything in my life that brought me joy. Was there anything that was bringing me joy? At that time, I was only able to identify two things. One of them was playing the electric bass guitar, and the other one was going to yoga classes. And my friend said, well, I think you should do those two things every day. And I thought, that is like the best idea I've ever heard anyone give me. I'm just going to do that. And I did. And at some point, there was like a divergence for me where I was like playing in some kind of like rock band and got really into yoga and, playing like late night on a Wednesday night for the sound guy when I got to wake up and teach a class at 7 a.m. At some point, like there was almost like kind of a lifestyle divergence. And I was like, you know what? Yoga is really healing me and music feels like a grind. But I have a very special place in my heart for the bass because it's one of the only things that, and I was never a very good musician either, but I think I saw that those are like your two prongs, it seems to me as well.
Yeah, you're most certainly right. We have those things in common for sure.
But it seems like the bass has been more of your home than yoga, or would you say what are the percentages in terms of your interest? I guess you make more of your living playing music, right?
Yeah, my living's mostly by playing music. It has been for several years now. I went to university in jazz performance, completed a bachelor's and a master's as well. But yeah, there was like a kernel of yoga at some point early on. In high school, I was hanging around with people of the Baha'i faith, which is a little known religion. Anyways, I was just like spiritually curious, and then in college, I took some religious studies courses, and I also took some. We had physical education courses, electives to take, and one of them I decided to take yoga at that time in college. Because I heard that it's good for musicians.
Well, wait a second. Let me ask you something. First of all, let me compliment you because I did spend most of my morning listening to that album that you were on with that in 2018, that Egyptian from Cairo, that artist playing the oud. Is that right?
Oh yeah, nice.
Such beautiful music. So I really enjoyed it, and I just wanted to compliment you on your playing there because it was really lovely. And then you just did say something about Baha'i faith, which has come up one time before. I'm just curious, how is it that you were hanging out with people from the Baha'i faith at that time in your life? How does that even happen?
Just one second. I'll say Ali Al Farouk is the artist that you're talking about, just for the listeners.
Yes, thank you. I'll put a link in the description. It's beautiful, very lovely music.
Cool. But yeah, so like in high school, there was a friend that's a member of the Baha'i faith. So I didn't know anything about it, but she was just talking about spirituality, and it seemed to pique my interest. Went to a couple of meetings that were just like open and not imposing anything. So I thought it was interesting.
Were they just discussions, or did you do practices or meditations? What were the meetings like?
They were mostly just meetings to discuss how they can do some outreach programs, try to help people in need and stuff. Because a big part of their faith is service. So that's interesting.
That makes sense. All right. Well, You mentioned your pursuit of music, and you said there was a kernel of yoga, and that you heard that yoga was good for musicians. What did they tell you? Like it just helps you with stress, or what? What were they? How were they selling it to musicians when you heard about it?
Mostly it was the physical side that was like, okay, it would be good for musicians to learn about their bodies. But I guess there was always this understanding that it could help with stress, although I wouldn't realize how music could be stressful at that point. But later on, I would probably. and finding that, so my entry point was mostly from the physical, and I recognized how it impacted how I understand, how I approach my musical instrument, and I would later start the double bass too, because I started on electric bass, but then I started learning the double bass, and that's a pretty physical instrument.
Yeah, no, I've picked one up, but I've never really played one, and I've always had the desire to one day have one to mess around with, but it is much a different physicality entirely.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
All right. Well, when you said you like took a course in yoga as well or something, like what was the yoga that you were being shown? Was it being like associated with a particular tradition or approach, or was it more general? What were those early yoga classes like for you?
Well, it was like a phys ed teacher at college who I want to say that she was coming from Iyengar yoga, but I'm not certain. But she did like kind of a decent job trying to show a couple of different schools from what I recall. Like I think she brought books from different schools as well. And I sort of gravitated towards the Iyengar thing because she was saying, oh, it's all about really precision. And I'm a pretty inquisitive guy in that sense and wanting to learn things correctly. And that appealed to me at that time. I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. Although she did bring up Ashtanga Vinyasa. I think she brought up some other schools, like probably Shivananda, because we got a center here in Montreal. So I'm sure she would have brought it up, but I can't recall all of the things that she brought up. But certainly she brought up Iyengar and Ashtanga Vinyasa.
Those are sort of the big three when I was coming up. What year are we talking about? How long ago was that?
Let's see. I want to say it could have been 2007.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, by then there was also just like a lot of hybriding by that time, but still, there was still the big three: Ashtanga, Iyengar, and Shivananda were like the three pillars. When I first started, it was one or the other.
Yeah. Not so much is known, like even today, like people don't know about Kuvalyananda. I'd love to know more what that's like. Not to like transition to that, but those schools nobody really talks about.
That's true. I think many of us have gone on to learn about other schools, including, the teachings of TK Vidyasakaracharya, which we can get to, which really was huge for me, having first spent time with those three biggies or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you, so after you took the kind of phys ed teacher's Iyengar influenced class, because it doesn't sound like it was.
Well, she showed some vinyasa,
Yeah, I was going to say, it didn't seem like it was a very, strict Iyengar method kind of class. She was taking from a lot of different things, maybe, or whatever.
Yeah, but my impression was, especially in hindsight, she seems like the kind of person that would have been an Iyengar.
Okay. In terms of her, teaching style, I get it.
Yeah, from what I recall, she was she was a particular presence or something.
Or even just you were saying, and let me just say that I started out going to Jiva Mukti Yoga Center, which was a mix of those three schools, essentially. And They had a lot of, it was before they created their own method. So they had a very diverse group of teachers teaching there. And you could kind of get a lot of different things depending on whose class you went to. But my initial interest was to go to study with somebody who could teach me the Iyengar alignment more, that could teach me more precision, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
So did you, after that class, what was your next thing? Did you finish school? Where does your yoga look like after you get out of school, or you start doing music?
Yeah, so I was playing gigs, and I always had it at the back of my mind that I really enjoyed that experience, and I would want to take up a more regular yoga practice on my own. But I just had gotten busy playing music. But little by little, I was starting to allow myself that opportunity, and then eventually I did pick up some yoga books, and then started taking classes with an Iyengar teacher.
All right, so your first, so do you think of that as like your first dedicated practice when you started studying with that Iyengar teacher, where that starts to become, because you're a musician, you know what it is to practice, right?
Yeah, so there is that.
Right? You got to practice to learn whatever the thing is. When does yoga become like a regular practice for you, like music was?
It would be years after my college days, and when I was thinking it's a good time to because I was never like into physical exercise, and I was thinking at that time, well, I should have something. And I did connect with yoga. Not to say it's only physical, obviously. And years later, I would then appreciate the other facets of yoga practice. But yeah, so at that time, years later, I decided, okay, so I need to do something physical. Otherwise, what's going to happen? I mean, become unhealthy or something. I don't know. So I started taking it more seriously in terms of seeking out opportunity to practice it in a more regular way. Yeah.
And at that time, you said at first it was more Iyengar classes, or were you going to lots of different classes?
So yeah, I gravitated towards Iyengar still at that point, but it was even by that point when I was inquiring into it a little more seriously, I wanted to know, well, who's Iyengar's teacher?
Right.
And then the name comes up, Sri T. Krishnamacharya. So I'm like, okay, what can I learn about that guy?
Right.
And then
that name comes up no matter what approach. That's the thing, right? If you go to an Iyengar class and you said, who did Iyengar listen to? They say T. Krishnamacharya. And if you go to an Ashtanga Vinyasa class, they say, well, who did Pattabhi Jois learn from? They say T. Krishnamacharya. But those feel like very different methods, even though they had the same source or whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly. So at that point, the next thing that I could see from that just inquiry, that's early inquiry, was that there is, like you mentioned, Ashtanga Vinyasa. So I dabbled in Ashtanga Vinyasa because I didn't.
Yeah, me too. It's just a dabbling. I didn't go all in. Yes.
But I did find it interesting. I first started with some David Swenson DVDs and his book, and took some classes eventually. But I was still like a diligent Iyengar practitioner, albeit I was dabbling outside of that, which doesn't seem too common amongst Iyengar people.
Not always. Although it's more and more, I think that's changed. But certainly back then, like I guess it's a little later than 2007 now, right? So not too long ago. But so did you go to any like Mysore style Ashtanga classes ever, or was it mostly your own exploration of like primary series?
I eventually would find myself at like Mysore classes, but I also took some lead classes.
And so what do you remember? Were you still doing a Iyengar method, or did you like switch approaches completely and go from Iyengar to Ashtanga?
Well, that's what I mean. I would say I dabbled. So I was practicing Iyengar yoga concurrently, I was even attending like workshops with senior teachers coming in, and my local teacher took a liking to me, but he didn't realize that I was also dabbling in Ashtanga Vinyasa, which I didn't find was actually too far, but certainly was different. I was recognizing, obviously. I mean, maybe you don't know, but do you suspicion that it would have been frowned upon that you would do such a thing? Was it not considered like copacetic to go to moonlight? It seemed like at a certain point, if people wanted to get serious about Iyengar yoga, then especially if people that wanted to become teachers, which I had no intention at that point, then it's like all Iyengar, all in. They have reading lists that are all Iyengar books, and it leaves little time to explore elsewhere, even within the broader lineage, which I don't find as tremendously sacrilegious to to look at the broad tree coming from Krishnamacharya. It would be maybe a little different if I was mixing completely to different lineage traditions altogether, like Shivananda, although I'm sure that there can be a way to sort of come to a harmony with that. But I didn't find there was so much conflict with just considering Krishnamacharya's teachings more broadly speaking, which also then led me to some writings by Srivatsa Ramaswami, who I followed from afar for a few years before I eventually decided to go learn from him.
Interesting. Wait a second. To me, first of all, I think that's when you were just talking and you were saying that, you dabbled in Ashtanga while studying Iyengar method. Same with me. And then you say, well, where does this come from? And you say, oh, hey, both of these people who teach this method or the heads of these methods had the same teacher. Mm-hmm. And then you look at that teacher and you say, well, who else studied with that teacher? And you start to see there's like all these other people. Did you discovered Ramaswamy before you discovered TKB Desikachar, though?
Yeah, that's correct. And I have to give credit to Anthony Grimley Hall. He had that blog. I don't know if you remember it.
Yes. I remember that. That was a while back, right?
Yeah. So he was coming from an Ashtanga Vinyasa side, but also then started getting into Ramaswamy's Vinyasa Krama. So that was kind of my entry point. He would publish Ramaswamy's newsletter, his monthly newsletter. He would put it up onto his blog, and I was starting to follow his writing. And even before that, I had found his book on the Vinyasa sequences when I was even just starting, but I didn't know what to make of it at that point because there was no teacher of that approach near me. So I just had the book, but I was just taking classes in Iyengar and Ashtanga Vinyasa. Yeah.
And honestly, it is a break from those other, like the physical practices in terms of how breath gets emphasized for one among a couple of different distinguishing characteristics, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. And it was only after learning from Ramaswamy that I wanted to supplement my continued learning under Ramaswamy. Like I still have a desire to keep learning from him for as long as he's teaching. But it was after my first studies under him that I realized the value that it would be in undertaking some supplemental learning with people coming from Desikachar teachings. And I took it upon myself to read Religiousness and Yoga and Art of Yoga earnestly,
Right.
What Desikachar is talking about and seeking out those opportunities. There's one of those silver linings with the pandemic. KYM has been doing a lot of online teaching, and I took several programs with them, which has been very, very enriching, just to supplement my learning under Ramaswamy Sir. And I find that it's definitely coming from the same place,
Well, that's the thing. There's certainly like a through line among all these different teachers, like you said, Ramaswamy, Desikachar, the Mohans. And just to say to you, you mentioned in your email me, like, why haven't you talked to people who study with Ramaswamy? And the only reason is because I just don't know people who've studied with Ramaswamy. And I must admit, I'm a little intimidated by Ramaswamy because he's very old school and kind of more formal than the teachers I met who had studied with Desikachar, Did you travel? Where is Ramaswamy? Where did you go to study with him?
Well, on that note you bring up, I firstly say I'm honored that you're having me on the show to broach this subject and coming from Ramaswamy's teachings, but I also admit some slight embarrassment that I'm the one that you're not.
It's purely by accident because we have a mutual friend, and that's why. But again, I just haven't had any real contacts. Like I said, I've reached out to people in the Mohans, and not everybody wants to come on the show, but I'm very happy to talk more about any of the people who teach along these lines, because there is a commonality between what Ramaswamy taught and what Desikachar taught, even though I imagine there are some differences as well.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I would encourage you, like in the email I sent.
Yeah, you gave me a big list. I'm going to reach out to them. Don't you worry. There's lots of great people on the list you sent. So
yeah, like Saramata Gabor. There's Sri Ram Sarvotam, which I don't think I included in that list. He's also very knowledgeable. There's Arun Deva. There's David Hurwitz, who co-authored a book with Ramaswamy. There's Ricky Tran, Anthony Grimley Hall. Where is he? He would be.
I don't know. That's true. You're just. I like it. I'm taking notes. Did
you ever talk to? I don't think you've ever talked to Andrea Panzer. She's an Ashtanga Vinyasa teacher. I want to say Spain, but I may be wrong. But she also got to take probably 10 years of attending 10 years of Sri Bhashyam's lectures, seminars. So she has an Ashtanga background, but she also has this broader understanding and appreciation of Krishnamacharya teachings coming from Sri Bhashyam. She also took some seminars with Ramaswamy. So, there's so many people that are much more experienced than me. So that's why I admit my...
Well, listen, we're not asking you to be an expert. We're asking you to just speak from your own experience. So no worries. And I guess I'm curious about what was it in the books that you found of Ramaswamy before you went to go study with him that made you want to go study with him? Do you remember what it was about what you read that sparked your inspiration?
Well, he spoke of Krishnamacharya in a way that I hadn't heard before. Before it was presented that Krishnamacharya was obviously this master practitioner of the asanas, and that's what we see a lot of in Iyengar Yoga and Ashtanga Vinyasa. That this tremendous scope of asanas that was coming from his teachings. But Ramaswamy was talking about Krishnamacharya, the scholar, and I was fascinated by that, because at a certain point I was feeling a bit disillusioned. I was thinking there's got to be more to this other than asanas. Mm-hmm. Everybody, when push comes to shove, they say, yeah, of course, yoga is about something much more than just the postures. Of course, it's just one part of what's known as Ashtanga Yoga.
And and if it's not the asanas, then what is it? What else is it? Exactly. I got to the same exact place as you. I was like, okay, it did have to at some point become about ideas or philosophy or...
Yeah. So I wanted to principally learn Patanjali Yoga from Ramaswamy, just learn the Yoga Sutra, because I tried to read Iyengar's book and I didn't really connect with it, I must say, although it's cool that he attempted his own translation of it. Mm-hmm. But it's not that the Yoga Sutra comes up in regular everyday Iyengar classes, so there was this hunger, and Ramaswamy seemed like the right guy because he seemed very scholarly minded, and he was highlighting Krishnamacharya's scholarship in a pretty big way. He was saying this is he was such a great scholar, and Ramaswamy's been teaching all of these texts that he learned from him. So that was such an interesting point to me. It was almost a side interest to try to understand what the breathing practice he was learning from Krishnamacharya, because at that point I was still kind of an Iyengar practitioner. I just wanted to get deeper into Yoga Sutra and maybe dabble into Vinyasa Krama, but then I just got hooked from the first breath instruction. It was just
Well, we'll get to the Vinyasa Krama, but first I want to point out what sounds to me to be the answer to the question that I asked before of what is it if it's an asana? You said studying sutras, one, involves a lot of chanting. You memorize them, right? The learning of the sutras in that tradition isn't just reading a translation. It's you memorize them and you chant them, and then you likely I would imagine have some kind of discussion around it. Is that right? Is that how you learn the sutras with Ramaswamy?
So I learned the chanting with someone that came from KYM. Mm-hmm. Ramaswamy encourages learning of the chanting, but when I went to learn from him, we only had opportunity to go word by word, just him explaining it, the whole 4 chapters of the text. nonetheless, I thought that was really extraordinary. He went word by word and broke everything down and gave insights wherever necessary from classical commentaries. And he brought a light to it that was very practical. It wasn't just intellectual. In fact, he was encouraging us to not just look at it as an intellectual subject, that it's meant to be a practical subject, that we have to put it into practice, and there's a very practical application to this stuff. Mm-hmm. So that was also extremely enriching for me, because that's what I was wanting. I was like super anxious at the end of my master's degree, and I broke out with a bout of shingles.
No.
No, I was like super anxious, and I was just like thinking, I'm practicing a lot of yoga, and I'm just tremendously anxious still. So what gives, And so I thought the answer must be in a text like this Yoga Sutra. And there is certainly
something, but that's not the practice part of it, though, right? That's the mind or idea part, like I was saying. I guess that's why the breath became so important. That's what happened to me
too. Yeah, getting into this long breathing is, I like to call it an exquisite breathing technique.
Okay, so when does that? Do you remember when that first gets presented to you? And when it got presented to you, were you taught it as doing Ujjayi pranayama? Like, did they say this is Ujjayi pranayama and you're going to try to lengthen your breath? And was it presented in a kind of more informational way, or was it just through the doing of it that it came about more in you?
Well, I first got like a brief introduction with someone that learned from Gary Kraftstyle, this guy, Andrew Sugarman.
Yes, I know Andrew from back at the Breathing Project days, Leslie Kamenoff's joint. We used to know each other. I remember him. And
he actually was tutored by Ramaswami one-on-one to chant the Yoga Sutra.
Oh, right. That's right. Oh, wow. That's right. That is the person I know who was studying with Ramaswami, Andrew.
Yeah.
Interesting. Oh.
So I was going to New York to watch a show in the evening, and I got in contact with him. I was like, hey, maybe I could take a class. He was really teaching from like a scaled down kind of practice, so I didn't really connect to it, I must say, because I was familiar with Iyengar yoga. But what struck me was this profound breathing. And then later, when I did go learn from Ramaswami in Los Angeles, it was all about that exact same breathing, except Ramaswami put it through more rigorous asana procedures that I was familiar with in Iyengar and Ashtanga Vinyasa.
I see. So Ramaswami did a more physical practice than Andrew did?
I would say, yeah.
Interesting. But still incorporating the same breath principles, you would say?
Exactly. So breath principles that I just hadn't seen before in my experiences and taking classes with Iyengar yoga teachers and Ashtanga Vinyasa teachers. And I mean, I took classes with senior visiting teachers like Chuck Miller and classes with Zubin Zartosh Demanish and Father Joe Pereira. Those are my favorite teachers of those schools, that I got to learn a little bit from. But I just wanted that breathing. Once I experienced it with Ramaswami, I was like, "Whoa, this is it for me."
It totally me too. And I would say, and I don't know how much, I imagine this was part of what you were learning from Ramaswami, but it was all about personal practice. Like I do it on my own in the morning when I wake up or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. He emphasized the ability to be sensitive and do our own practice and not require someone holding our hand, although it's nice to check in.
It's nice to have a class, sure, of course. I guess what I'm curious about, and it happened the same with me, that there was a moment where I understood something about making breath the central feature of the asana in a way that was different. Even when I had teachers who would always say inhale and exhale, and we did Ashtanga Vinyasa where we even did Ujjayi. Like I knew what Ujjayi pranayama was before I came to Desikachar teachings through Ashtanga, but I just was never doing it in the same way, or like it wasn't with the same ideas or idea of breath pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the other kind of breathing, like the yogic breathing in Shivananda, which was like 3-part breathing, right? Belly breathing was considered deep breathing, or diaphragmatic breathing. That's Leslie's whole shtick, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's a fundamental difference. And I guess my curiosity is, when you studied with Ramaswami, did they present it? Did they articulate it and say, we're going to do Ujjayi pranayama like that? Like, how was it taught?
Well, he starts off by saying it's to have like a slight constriction in the pit of the throat,
Mm-hmm.
with a hissing sound like a cobra, and a rubbing sensation, and then he would say that's Ujjayi breath, and that's where we start. So he called it Ujjayi.
Mm-hmm.
But he was saying like it shouldn't be so loud that you hear it across the room. So that might be something different.
That was one of my questions. I saw you had actually written something about that, about whether or not it should be loud or not. And I've certainly had that conversation within myself and with others over the years. What's your take on whether or not Ujjayi is supposed to be loud or not?
Yeah, I think it's probably it ends up being a personal thing too. I know that in Ashtanga Vinyasa they tend to make it a little louder.
Mm.
But people just need to become sensitive and understand, is it causing dryness and irritation if they do it too loud? So you just have to, people have to find their own way about it. Mm-hmm. That's one of those things that turned me off about certain dogmas in both of the schools that I had been exploring. Some people, probably because they want to establish themselves as really sticking to the methodology, some people might come across as dogmatic more than others, and at a certain point I was getting a bit turned off by certain dogmas.
I hear you. I had an allergy to dogma as well. Mm-hmm. That developed over time. I guess what I came to was that it had to do with like length of breath, not necessarily like how loud it was.
Yeah, exactly.
And I would say that just for myself personally, and it kind of makes sense, on days where I'm not feeling very present or not that focused or something, or I need something to rein my mind in more, doing it loud is very helpful, like even listening to the sound.
Yeah.
But on days when I'm feeling very present and I'm with it, then it's like it's totally quiet and nobody would ever hear it even. You know, it's about length of breath and rhythm or tempo of breath almost, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's a personal exploration. So to just blankly say it should be loud and I should hear it like there and that far away from you, it seems, well, for whom, for like, it depends, right? The whole Desikachar thing, you know?
Yes, well, it does. That's nice that you said that was the Desikachar thing, that it depends. That is one way I've heard it articulated as well. I guess I'm curious, when you learned the breathing with Ramaswami, like I know people who studied at the Mandiram or with Desikachar where they like used metronomes, you know, and like you counted it out. Did you do that kind of work with it?
Well, the first class he mentioned we can use sound, which was an interesting thing. So he didn't get into so much chanting in terms of movement like we see with Desikachar teachings, but he did say at first it could be helpful to use Brahmari to lengthen the breathing, which at that point it's mostly on it's exhale to do.
Yeah, for anybody listening who doesn't know what that is, like sometimes in Desikachar teachings, when you're doing vinyasas, instead of doing like an Ujjayi exhale, you would chant like a mantra or Om or something, and that is a way of lengthening your exhale essentially. Right?
Mm-hmm. Whereas the Brahmari technique is a pranayama technique where you hum to make the sound of a bumblebee.
Oh, right. So you would do that on exhale, you'd make the bumblebee sound.
Yeah, and then after he would say, okay, you could let it go, but to try to continue lengthening comfortably, of course, he would always say it should be long and smooth. If the breath is long but it's not smooth because it's strange, then obviously you're doing...
Got to have the sukha, right? It can't be a struggle.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You know, that's what you're saying. Now, I guess my other thing is you keep mentioning vinyasa krama. Mm-hmm. And one, it's interesting because that phrase comes up and people I've often cited it in like articles or blogs over the years of like, oh, well, that's where the word vinyasa comes from when they talk about vinyasa yoga. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times when people think of vinyasa yoga, they think of, kind of like choreography, flow sequences or something. But right. Vinyasa krama in this tradition has more specific meanings, although I will say I've heard it referred to or kind of talked about in different ways, even among people who studied with Desikachar. Sometimes Vinyasa krama seems to me to be like specific sequences. Sometimes it seems more about like principles of sequencing.
Right.
And sometimes it even feels like even more a bit philosophical. But I guess all the things end up being philosophical. So I'm curious, when you say the Vinyasa krama of Ramaswami, and I know you're not the authority on that and no one's expecting you to be, but what is your takeaways or what is your understanding of that when you use that? Because you call what you do Vinyasa krama yoga. What do you mean by that?
Well, like between, say, like Vinyasa flow and like popular styles, this is kind of hybrid and people experimenting and trying to make it flowy and maybe influenced by
music playlists and stuff,
Yeah,
I get it. I'm not bashing. It's a kind of yoga class, but it's not like going to study with Desikachar or Ramaswamy.
Yeah, whereas what Ramaswamy is teaching, which is pretty much a lot to do with what Desikachar taught. Also, it's the same framework. It just feels a little more traditional than that. There's the use of the word vinyasa. First of all, there's this notion that it's visheshaha, nyasaha, vinyasaha. So it's a special, unique placement. And of course, in Desikachar teachings, they also teach individual nyasas as part of like meditation process, So then it's connected, and it just seems, okay, Krishnamacharya was coming from that kind of a tradition. So it has to do with what he held in high regard with his daily rites, I find. The Sankhya Vandana, they have lots of nyasas, and they have mantras that go with different nyasam and that daily ritual, and samantraka practice, like use of mantra, was held of great importance to Krishnamacharya. You could see it in his writings, even as far back as Yoga Makaranda. He's talking about it. So then Ramaswamy teaches some procedures, samantraka with mantra. So you could tell, like that's to me where it's coming from. It's somewhat.
That's what you think of as Vinyasa krama.
Well, not to say that mantra is integral, but it's where it's coming from, maybe. And also, so Vinyasa is linking movements with breath in some people's definition of it.
Right, that's often another definition for vinyasa. And I sometimes use it because it's like common parlance. People understand it, that the breath and the movement are synchronized. And Desikachar and Ramaswamy certainly taught that, right?
Yeah, that's part of it. Krama, in any case, means in steps. So it can be understood progressively. So progressively moving in steps, certain placements. Like, so if just in Yoga Makaranda has the same kind of sequencing you see in Ashtanga Vinyasa, except it's like a full Vinyasa. So each of those movements is considered a Vinyasa, a placement. Placement. So, and even if you're just doing like
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.